For decades, Michael Landon's legacy has stood almost untouchable. To millions of viewers, he was the perfect TV father, warm, principled, larger than life. Behind the scenes, he was the driving force of Little House on the Prairie, the man who shaped every line, every moment, every image that appeared on screen. His family protected that image long after he was gone. They rarely spoke publicly, and when they did, it was to celebrate the man they knew. But then, one of his closest co-stars broke her silence. When Karen Grassle published her memoir, she shattered the picture many held of Landon. Her revelations were raw and unsettling. She described power struggles, crude jokes, unequal treatment, and a set that wasn't always as harmonious as it appeared to fans. It was a side of Michael Landon the public had never been invited to see. Now, decades later, even Michael Landon's own daughter has stepped into the conversation. So what exactly did Karen reveal? And why are her words still echoing through his legacy today? Long before the prairie landscapes and family dramas that defined her career, Karen Grassle built her craft on the stage. Born in 1942 in Berkeley, California, she grew up in an environment where education and the arts mattered deeply. After excelling in school, she earned a scholarship to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, a rare opportunity for an American actress at the time. Immersed in classical theater, she honed a sense of discipline and range that would later set her apart on American television. By the late 1960s and early 70s, Grassle was working steadily in New York theater. She appeared in Shakespearean productions, regional plays, and off-Broadway projects, building a reputation for quiet intensity rather than Hollywood glamour. She wasn't a household name, but within acting circles she was respected for her authenticity and commitment. Television wasn't her original path. She envisioned a future on the stage, but opportunities for women in theater were limited, and the stability of television work held a certain appeal. When the producers of Little House on the Prairie began searching for someone to play Caroline Ingalls, the role proved difficult to cast. They needed a woman who could embody strength, maternal warmth, and moral grounding without overshadowing Michael Landon's central presence. Grassle wasn't the first choice. In fact, she auditioned almost by chance. Her agent pushed her to read for the part, even though she was initially reluctant. She boarded a flight to Los Angeles with little expectation that this would change her life. The audition surprised her. Michael Landon, already a television icon from his years on Bonanza, held significant creative control over the series. He acted as executive producer, head writer, and lead actor. Grassle recalled that he seemed open and welcoming at that first meeting. She read the lines for Caroline with quiet authority, leaning on her stage experience to project a sense of emotional steadiness. Landon saw something in her performance that fit his vision for the show's family dynamic. Within days, she was cast. The offer came with promise. The role of Caroline was central to the show's moral backbone, the steady presence amid frontier hardship. For Grassle, it meant joining a major network series at a time when such opportunities were scarce for classically trained actresses. She understood the stakes. This wasn't just another role. It was a chance to anchor a family drama that would reach millions of viewers each week. As production prepared to begin, Karen entered this new world with quiet optimism. She brought theater discipline to a television set that revolved almost entirely around one man's vision. What she didn't yet realize was how that dynamic would shape every aspect of her experience on Little House on the Prairie. When filming began in 1974, the atmosphere on the Little House on the Prairie set carried a mix of excitement and strict hierarchy. Michael Landon stood at the center of it all. He wasn't simply the star. He wrote episodes, directed, and oversaw production with exacting standards. Crew members understood his authority clearly, and cast members quickly learned that he set the tone both on and off camera. For Karen Grassle, fresh from the stage, it was an adjustment. Television worked at a faster pace, and the creative chain of command left little room for negotiation. The show's early episodes focused on establishing the Ingalls family as the emotional anchor of the series. Grassle's portrayal of Caroline brought calm resilience to scenes that might otherwise have leaned on sentimentality. Viewers responded strongly to the chemistry between Michael Landon's Charles and Grassle's Caroline. Ratings climbed quickly, and the network recognized that the series was becoming a cultural touchstone. The wholesome frontier family captured something audiences were craving during a turbulent decade. Behind the camera, however, the structure was rigid. Scripts bore Landon's imprint. He was known to revise dialogue overnight, sometimes rewriting entire scenes before shooting began the next morning. Grassle, trained to approach scripts with analytical precision, often arrived on set to find lines altered or removed without warning. She adapted professionally, but she noted the imbalance. Landon's dual role as co-star and showrunner gave him sweeping control, and that shaped the way every actor interacted with the material. Early on, there were moments of genuine collaboration. Landon appreciated Grassle's ability to convey depth without melodrama, and he trusted her to ground scenes emotionally. Their on-screen partnership worked because she matched his intensity with quiet steadiness. But the balance was delicate. Landon's attention often shifted between acting and production responsibilities, and when creative differences arose, his word carried the final weight. Grassle learned this quickly. The pressures extended beyond creative choices. Production schedules were grueling. Episodes were filmed rapidly to meet network demands, and Landon's perfectionism meant long days under the California sun, often in difficult conditions. Cast and crew respected his work ethic, but it also fostered a culture where questioning decisions was rare. For newer actors, particularly women, asserting themselves came with risk. Grassle maintained a professional demeanor, but she began noticing patterns. Male colleagues, especially those in Landon's close circle, had more access to him during breaks. Their input occasionally found its way into rewrites. By contrast, her suggestions rarely led to changes. This wasn't overt hostility, but it underscored where influence rested. Landon's leadership was absolute. At this stage, none of this was public. Interviews and promotional materials projected unity and warmth, emphasizing the cast's camaraderie. And in many ways that spirit was real. The early seasons were marked by genuine creative energy. Yet beneath the surface, a clear power structure was taking shape, one that would define the dynamics of the show for years to come. As Little House on the Prairie moved deeper into its run, the show became a ratings powerhouse. With success came new contracts, renewed deals, and shifting expectations among the cast. For Karen Grassle, the disparity between her role's importance and her compensation became increasingly difficult to ignore. Caroline Ingalls was central to the series' moral core, yet her salary lagged far behind what male leads on comparable shows were earning. She decided to confront the issue directly. During contract negotiations in the mid-70s, Grassle approached the network through her representatives to request a raise. By this point, she had established herself as a respected performer whose presence anchored the series. But the environment she faced was unforgiving. Michael Landon's influence extended into these negotiations, not as a formal decision-maker for salaries, but as the figure whose approval or disapproval carried significant weight. The production was built around his vision, and executives often deferred to his preferences. Grassle's request was met with resistance. Accounts from later years indicate that the network offered her minimal increases, framing her role as replaceable. Despite her clear contribution to the show's emotional texture, she held her ground. This was not a demand for stardom, but a call for fair recognition within an industry where women, particularly in supporting roles, were often undervalued. The negotiations turned tense. Landon became aware of her stance, and according to Grassle's own recollections, their working relationship shifted afterward. Publicly, nothing changed. On screen, the Ingalls marriage continued to be portrayed with the same warmth and unity that fans loved. But privately, the atmosphere cooled. Landon had built a set culture that rewarded loyalty and unquestioning cooperation. Grassle's challenge, though professional and justified, was perceived within that structure as defiance. She noticed subtle changes, fewer collaborative discussions, a sharper tone during interactions, a sense that her position on set had become more precarious. These tensions weren't splashed across tabloids. The entertainment media of the time rarely covered contractual disputes involving women, and Grassle herself chose not to speak publicly. She valued the work and the audience connection, and she recognized the risks of voicing discontent while under contract. Instead, she continued performing with the same professionalism viewers saw on screen, even as behind-the-scenes dynamics became more fraught. This period marked a turning point. Grassle had entered the series with optimism and trust in the creative partnership. By the late 70s, she understood the unspoken boundaries. Landon controlled the narrative, on television and within the production itself. Challenging that authority even on matters of fairness came with consequences. She chose silence at the time, a silence that would last decades, until she decided to write her own story. When Karen Grassle published her memoir in 2021, it marked the first time she spoke fully and publicly about what she had experienced on the Little House on the Prairie set. Titled Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, the book moved beyond nostalgia. It painted a vivid picture of the realities behind one of television's most beloved family dramas, offering details that had been absent from decades of glowing retrospectives. Grassle described a workplace defined by Michael Landon's overwhelming influence. She wrote about the sharp contrast between the wholesome image projected on screen and the atmosphere she often encountered off-camera. According to her account, Landon frequently made crude jokes on set, some of which she found demeaning. She explained how these moments, combined with his control over scripts and production decisions, created an environment where challenging his behavior felt nearly impossible. These were not isolated incidents but part of the daily rhythm of a show built around one man's authority. The memoir also revisited the salary disputes that had strained their professional relationship. Grassle explained that after she requested fairer compensation, her interactions with Landon changed noticeably. She recounted moments when he dismissed her concerns or shut down conversations abruptly. What struck many readers was not just the behavior itself, but the context, a time when women in Hollywood were expected to endure inequities silently. Grassle framed these experiences not as bitterness, but as a clear-eyed account of the dynamics that shaped her career. Perhaps most striking were the passages that explored her emotional response to these years. Grassle didn't write as someone seeking revenge. She wrote as an actress reflecting on how power structures can silence people, even those at the heart of a hit series. Her memoir was measured, but direct. It didn't vilify Landon as a one-dimensional figure. Instead, it presented him as a complicated man, charismatic, talented, but also capable of behavior that deeply affected those around him. The public reaction was immediate. Fans who had grown up watching the show were stunned. For many, Michael Landon was inseparable from their childhood memories. His death in 1991 had cemented his image as a beloved television icon. Grassle's memoir disrupted that image. Media outlets picked up her revelations, sparking renewed debates about how television history is remembered. Interviews and panel discussions revisited episodes with a different lens. Viewers who once saw a flawless patriarch began to consider the layers beneath the performance. For the Landon family, the memoir represented more than a book release. It reopened a narrative that had remained largely unchallenged for decades. Karen Grassle's decision to finally speak set in motion a public reassessment of one of television's most enduring legacies, a reassessment that could not be ignored. By the time Karen Grassle released her memoir, Michael Landon's public image had been fixed for decades. When he died of pancreatic cancer in 1991, the outpouring of grief across the United States was immense. Television specials celebrated his career. News segments focused on his strength in the face of illness. Viewers remembered the man who brought Charles Ingalls to life, who produced stories that shaped family television in the 70s and 80s. For many, he wasn't simply an actor, he represented an entire era of moral storytelling. That image didn't form by accident. Landon had spent years crafting it. Through his work on Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and later Highway to Heaven, he positioned himself as both creative leader and moral figurehead. His shows consistently highlighted themes of perseverance, family unity, and moral clarity. Interviews during his lifetime reinforced this persona. He often spoke about responsibility, hard work, and values, presenting himself as someone who lived by the same principles his characters embodied. This narrative became part of American television history. Grassle's memoir disrupted that established story. Her detailed accounts didn't erase his achievements, but they reframed them. Suddenly, audiences were asked to hold two realities at once: the beloved public figure and the flawed, sometimes difficult colleague. For fans who had idolized him, this duality was uncomfortable. Letters to newspapers and online forums reflected divided reactions. Some readers dismissed Grassle's revelations as unnecessary, arguing that Landon's contributions outweighed personal shortcomings. Others saw her memoir as a necessary act of honesty, especially from a woman who had remained silent for so long. Within the industry, Landon's reputation was equally layered. Colleagues often described his tireless energy and sharp instincts, but many acknowledged privately that his control on set could be intimidating. Some former cast members publicly defended him after the memoir's release, emphasizing his generosity and work ethic. Others acknowledged that tensions existed but avoided taking sides. This range of responses reflected the complexity of legacy. How public figures are remembered depends on who is speaking and when. The timing of Grassle's memoir mattered. Decades after the show's original run, a new generation was rediscovering Little House on the Prairie through streaming platforms. Documentaries and retrospectives examined its cultural impact, often presenting Landon as a figure of moral clarity in a changing television landscape. Her book entered that conversation at the exact moment when historical narratives were being re-evaluated, making its impact even stronger. For Michael Landon's family, this posed a unique challenge. They had lived for decades with the public reverence surrounding his memory. Grassle's memoir didn't simply critique him. It added nuance to a story they had helped preserve. The collision between those two narratives, a cherished legacy and a co-star's lived experience, ensured that the conversation would not fade quickly. It was no longer about a single television series. It had become about how history itself is written. When Karen Grassle's memoir reignited public debate, one group remained notably quiet at first: Michael Landon's family. For years, they had guarded his legacy with careful reverence. They appeared at tributes, participated in documentaries, and kept his image closely tied to the moral ideals his television work represented. Unlike co-stars, they rarely engaged with the show's behind-the-scenes history. Their silence carried weight, reinforcing the version of Michael Landon that the public already knew. Decades earlier, however, one of his children had already offered her perspective: Cheryl Landon Wilson. His eldest daughter published a memoir of her own in 1992 titled "I Promised My Dad." Written less than a year after his death, it was a deeply personal account that portrayed him as a devoted parent and relentless worker. She described a man who pushed himself to the limits of endurance, both professionally and personally, to create the television he believed in. Her book reflected the intimacy of family life rather than the dynamics of the set, giving audiences a glimpse of the father behind the icon. Cheryl's portrayal didn't attempt to address workplace tensions because, at the time, those tensions weren't publicly discussed. Grassle's memoir would not emerge for nearly 3 decades. But in the wake of its release, Cheryl's earlier words took on a new resonance. Interviews and passages from her book resurfaced online, often shared by fans seeking to defend Michael Landon's reputation. They circulated quotes about his kindness, his humor at home, and his determination to make meaningful television. Without issuing a formal response, Cheryl's past reflections became part of the modern conversation, standing in contrast to Grassle's later accounts. This contrast is what gave her voice renewed significance. Grassle spoke as a co-star, someone who experienced Landon's leadership from within the production hierarchy. Cheryl spoke as a daughter, shaped by years spent with him away from the cameras. Their perspectives didn't overlap, they existed in parallel, each illuminating a different dimension of the same man. For audiences, this duality offered no easy answers. Instead, it deepened the complexity of his legacy. Importantly, Cheryl never issued statements rebutting Karen Grassle's memoir. There were no press releases, interviews, or television appearances aimed at challenging her claims. The Landon family maintained their preference for privacy, allowing public discussions to unfold without direct intervention. Her earlier testimony, however, remained powerful. By simply existing, it reminded audiences that Michael Landon's story was larger than any single narrative. In cultural terms, this moment marked a shift. For decades, family members of television icons rarely entered legacy debates, but as audiences began reassessing history through memoirs and retrospectives, the voices of those closest to the figures gained new relevance. Cheryl Landon Wilson didn't speak in reaction to Grassle, yet her words, preserved from an earlier era, became a counterpoint that shaped how people interpreted the controversy. Her voice, quiet but enduring, underscored how legacy is built not by one account, but by many intersecting truths. More than half a century after Little House on the Prairie first aired, the story surrounding Michael Landon and Karen Grassle continues to evolve. New generations discover the series through streaming platforms, often encountering it without any knowledge of the tensions that unfolded behind the scenes. To them, it appears as it did to viewers in the 1970s, a nostalgic portrait of family, faith, and frontier resilience. Yet beneath that familiar surface, a far more layered history is now part of the conversation. Grassle's memoir has become a key text in understanding that history. Readers who once viewed the series through uncomplicated affection now examine it with sharper eyes. Film historians, journalists, and television scholars have folded her revelations into larger discussions about workplace power dynamics in the entertainment industry. Her account is frequently cited alongside other memoirs that have reshaped how audiences understand classic television eras, especially those dominated by charismatic male leads. What once seemed untouchable is now open to scrutiny. The public response has shown no signs of fading. Each anniversary of the series premiere brings renewed articles and panel discussions. Documentaries revisit the show's legacy, often including Grassle's perspective alongside the enduring public image of Michael Landon. Fans debate online, some defending their cherished memories, others emphasizing the importance of acknowledging the fuller story. The discussion is neither settled nor polarized into simple sides. Instead, it reflects the ongoing process of cultural memory, how figures once seen in singular terms become understood as complex human beings. For the Landon family, this sustained attention means his legacy is constantly reframed through contemporary lenses. Cheryl Landon Wilson's earlier memoir remains part of that framing. Even without new statements, her account continues to circulate as a touchstone for those who remember Landon as a father and visionary, rather than solely a producer with flaws. Her voice stands beside Grassle's, neither erasing nor confirming, but coexisting in the public's collective understanding of who Michael Landon was. This evolving narrative mirrors broader shifts in how society engages with its cultural icons. In previous decades, television stars often occupied fixed positions in the public imagination. Their reputations were protected by networks, publicists, and fan loyalty. Today, memoirs, archives, and online communities allow audiences to revisit those reputations, uncovering contradictions and expanding the record. Landon's story exemplifies this transformation. It's no longer only about the man viewers saw on screen or the father his children knew. it's about how those versions interact with the testimonies of the people who worked beside him. As time moves forward, the conversation continues to widen rather than fade. Grassle's decision to speak altered the way this story is told, and Cheryl's preserved words added another layer. Together they ensure that Michael Landon's legacy will never return to a single polished narrative. It will remain dynamic, debated, and deeply human. Michael Landon's daughter never set out to join a public debate, yet her preserved words now stand beside Karen Grassle's testimony, shaping how audiences remember a television icon. The memoir peeled back layers that had been hidden for decades, and Cheryl Landon Wilson's earlier reflections added a counterpoint grounded in family memory. Together they transformed a once singular legacy into a multifaceted story that continues to evolve. The past has not been rewritten, but it has been re-examined with new clarity. For more emotional stories, check out this video.